labour. So this is actually very restrictive on the ability of the individual to develop, because you're locked into a certain type of work, whether it's manual or mental work. We stand for the expansion of leisure time, and throughout the post-war boom period, there was a lot of discussion, etc., with new technologies and so forth about the ability to gain extra leisure time and so forth. But basically, because we don't have workers' control, technological advantage and production development and productivity gains and so forth don't result in an expansion of leisure time. These things result in a large section of people being overworked, underworked, and also without work. When I say underworked, I mean don't have enough work to be able to participate within capitalist society. But further from the expansion of leisure time, we also want to, ultimately within communism, we don't want work and leisure time, the ultimate thing in developed socialism or advanced communism type thing, is to move towards the abolition of difference between work and leisure time, so that basically work is an experience that is just part of everyday life and not a burden for people. And that's the point I was going to make about this, is even in the very, very early stages of development of socialism, you can actually see this kind of process developing where people will engage in more voluntary labour because work becomes more useful and not just a means of kind of drawing your wage and your living. So these are the kind of main factors in the development of the individual. And that question about freeing up leisure time and so forth, and I guess this coincides with freeing up large amounts of surplus value to be able to make education possible for people and all this sort of thing. So I think this is one of the kind of central questions and objective limitations that this work that capitalism imposes. During the introduction, I touched on this question of violence and how a lot of people might be drawn more towards reformism and things like this, because it means that ultimately they don't have to make kind of contact with the question of the fact that we think that there needs to be armed power, and that we do support armed overthrow of the ruling class ultimately. And I guess this also, one of the aspects of this is that within the anti-war movement we operate a lot differently to pacifists and other utopians and whatnot. We do make a very clear distinction between just and unjust war. So unless it slips in there, you're not usually going to see something like no war on our newspaper or something like that, because we actually do support class wars. And this doesn't just mean we support some kind of revolutionary war. It also means that during colonial war or something like this, we do need to take a side and identify who we support within violence. And Lenin also makes a lot of contribution in this area and talks about how kind of bourgeois pacifist approaches and things like this tend to identify who fired the first shot and all these kind of things as to who we would support in an armed conflict. Whereas as Marxists, we have Marxism is a scientific method, and our approach to international situations and international conflicts is based on our analysis of imperialism. And so with that analysis of imperialism, we can look at the class forces involved in different conflicts. And so this leads us to, as I'm sure many of you would have been at the PFLP discussion yesterday, we think that people, particularly within national liberation struggles, have the right to counteract the violence of the oppressing classes or nations. And separately from the kind of imperialist or inter-imperialist or colonial wars, which are kind of ongoing, or inter-imperialist rivalries expressed through colonial wars and whatnot, we also support the eventual use or threat or need for there to be an armed capability of the working class in a revolutionary situation. And this hinges around around the first slide about the question of, like, one of the fundamental question for us is which class holds power. Another kind of thing that is another piece of propaganda around Marxism is that we stand for the elimination of the ruling class, and that is quite correct, but none of us stand for, like, to my knowledge, no serious revolutionary or socialist parties stand for the physical elimination of the ruling class. There have been experiences of that which have been labelled as communism and things like this, Pol Pot and so forth, but we, like the whole kind of Pol Pot kind of scenario, we wouldn't actually describe as a socialist movement in any way, but a kind of utopian, a strange kind of violent utopian type of going backwards type of not progressing type of ideology or practice, or whatever it is. I think the PL, Progressive Labour Party, I think they're kind of crazies over in the States, actually support the shooting of the ruling class, but for us we only joke about it, kind of thing. Now, it's there is a lot of distortion around this kind of stuff. I remember reading, probably, we're near Victoria and all that. I remember reading in Salient one year somebody had written something about Che Guevara, and this person wrote back quoting Che Guevara out of context, talking about how Che Guevara wanted to eliminate the peasant class. And of course that is completely true, because we stand for we do stand for the elimination of classes, but not in a kind of, not in that physical way. I think another Che Guevara kind of slogan that is always twisted and distorted by bourgeois sources and mouthpieces or whatever it is this idea of create two, three, or many Vietnams, or and that's also a reference to the fact that we want international pressure on the imperialists and armed engagements against the imperialists. And as many countries as possible to weaken the ruling class, but by no means means that we're kind of like warmongers or whatever. Phil will probably go into this very in much more detail, and that's good, because this is actually really kind of crass way of viewing things. But basically, our view is that society continues to develop, and the main driver of that development is production itself, and changing forms of production or whatnot. So we go through different forms of society based on what kind of forces of production are possible at the time. So we see those kind of five stages or generalizations of